fun with science, engineering, and technology. My name is Mr. Ross, and my assistants this morning are Raphael and
Jacob.
So what we're going to do, they just started a new unit up in their science class called Populations and Ecosystems. Populations, when you think of population, most everybody thinks of people, right? And it's not just people, is it? Populations can be all kinds of things. We have populations of cows, cats, dogs, right? So any kind of a living thing, a group of them we could call a population. What about an ecosystem? What is that? Jacob?
An ecosystem is a place where animals and people all live together.
Right, it's a place where animals and people all live together and
survive,
and they also have some non-living. You're talking about all the living things part of the ecosystem, but there are also some non-living things, right?
Yep.
Like the soil, and whether it's the water and sunlight and all those things. All right, one of the things that you're going to do, we're not going to talk about, but it'll probably be very interesting when you start this unit, right, is you're going to raise some milkweed bugs, right? And that's going to be your population, and you're going to put them in a little ecosystem, with some pieces of milkweed plant, and these bugs grow up very quickly. They reproduce very quickly, so you can within the classroom time, you can check out the full life cycle of those bugs and a couple generations of them. Okay. So what we have next is, I'm going to show this one because I grew up here, right, the Monongahela area, and it's a national forest, right? And that's what it was is originally a lot of old forest and very, very large trees. Right? And over the years, when the pioneers went out there, what they did is they cut down the trees for the lumber, and so they practically destroyed all the forest. In fact, some of my ancestors lived in trees. Don't laugh; it's not funny. I mean, they went out there and into this area, and there were no houses or anything, right? And before they could get a cabin built, they had very, very large sycamore trees, and these sycamore trees, right, sometimes were 10, 15 feet in diameter, right? And they would rot out on the inside, so it was very easy. Made a nice apartment. They could hollow out a little place in the sycamore tree, and they could spend their first winter inside the sycamore tree. And a lot of them did that. So that's one of the things that I just wanted to show you that one. But that's an ecosystem, right? It's a little different than this Sakura National Forest, which we have this big Sakura cactus, right? And some little prickly pear. Anybody, you ever eat prickly pears? Mm. Right? Well, they have a nice flower on them in the springtime, right? And they have a pear. It's about, they call it a prickly pear. It's not really a pear, but it's got thorns and stuff on it. That's why they call it prickly. And the Indians go out and pick those things, and of course they take all the little sticky things off of them, and then they're pretty good, right? And this is in the Sonora Desert, right? The Sonora Desert is, get back to my map here, right? Out in here in Arizona and California, New Mexico, and you see there's little stars for that Sakura National Park, right? And what they've done is they've generated a whole bunch of national parks in North America, right? Primarily to protect the ecosystem. Okay? So we at least, instead of destroying everything, we can have some places where the animals and the plant and the environment basically stay the same. All right? So, now, I used to work right about here, right, just a little bit to the east of that Sakura National Park, right?
Mexico?
In Texas, New Mexico, right? So this national park here, this one, Sakura, is in a Sonora Desert, right? And just to the east of it is the Chihuahua Desert, the Chihuahuan Desert. Well, what are you thinking about? You're laughing, right? I know this is fun with science, engineering, and technology, but why are you laughing? Huh? Why? Tell me why. Come on, speak up. You're thinking of that little dog, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that desert wasn't named after that little dog, right? It, it would go to blow up a map, okay? Here is Texas, right? This part over here, right? Here's New Mexico. Down here is Old Mexico, right? And one of the states, Old Mexico has states just like the United States. All right, one of the states is called Chihuahua, all right? The little dog was named after the state of Chihuahua in Mexico, right? And this orange part that we see is the Chihuahuan Desert, right, which is named after that state in Mexico. Sonora Desert, right, where that national park was we just saw in the book a minute ago, is a little bit over here to the west, right? Right, so it comes up into Arizona and so forth. But what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about this Chihuahuan Desert. Right, here's El Paso, which is about as far west as you can get in Texas without getting into New Mexico. And where I used to work was a place called White Sands Missile Test Range. It's right up here, right in the middle of that desert. Okay? And that Chihuahuan Desert, if you look at it, looks something like that. Right? It doesn't have those big sequoia cactus like the Sonoran Desert, right? But it's got some little cactus. It has some prickly pears, and it's got this one. I don't forget the name of this particular cactus, but it looks something like that. Nice blue sky, right? What color is the dirt? Brown dirt.
Yeah.
All right. We got a Chihuahua. You carry taco. All right. So, and here's another shot of it, another picture of it, right? And if you notice, what do we notice about this desert?
Everything looks
It's sort of dry, right? There are no plants with big leaves on them, right? They're just, if they have any leaves at all, they're little tough things like these, all right? And if they're cactus, instead of the leaves, they have the needles on the cactus, the spines on the cactus. All right, why do you think that might be?
To protect themselves.
Well, that protects them, all right. It keeps things from coming up and nibbling on them too much. But the other, yeah, and it basically still is protect themselves, but not protect themselves from animals, but
collect like water and dew and all that.
right, because what happens normally if we take one of the big oak trees we have out here, or a maple tree, whatever, is that leaf, right, gives off what? It gives off, during the process, it gives off oxygen, all right, and also water, right? It perspires just like we do. So if you went out in a desert where it's very, very dry and very, very hot, and you had a big old maple tree out there, guess what's going to happen to it?
It's going to die.
It's going to die because it's going to lose all its water. So you have plants that look like this. This one here is a yucca, right, plant, right, which has some little spiny things, and it has a big stalk on it like this, and it has some flowers on top of it in the springtime, right, which the Indians used to eat, and they also ate the roots off of these things. Right, so that yucca plant now is equipped to operate in the desert, right? You see a few of them around here, right, because people carried them back and planted them, right? And where you see them the most is on a hillside. If they planted them on a hillside, right? And the reason that they grow there is because what's going to happen to the water?
It's all going to come
It's going to
down.
run down. If he planted them down on the flat ground where the water would settle, right, the poor little yucca plant's going to drown and it won't survive. So they can take the cold weather pretty good. So you see these every once in a while around where people have planted them. They've carried them back. Right? So, like I say, I used to work out in the middle of this Chihuahuan Desert, right, which is not named after the dog. It's named after the state of Chihuahua in Mexico. And you think it ever rains out there?
Barely.
Very little.
It rains some, right? It depends on which desert you're in. Some deserts it doesn't rain hardly at all, right? But in the Chihuahuan Desert it does rain. In fact, if you remember the news, they had a short clip of the Sonoran Desert, and they had floods in the Sonora Desert here last week or so, right? And the reason they have the floods out in the desert, which is very, very common, is because when it does rain, the water doesn't soak down into the sand. It runs off. Right, so if it rains real hard, one of the dangers that you have, right, is you have like a flash flood that comes through, a bunch of water comes through, and could wash you away, drown you, whatever. And since the water doesn't soak down into the desert, right, in between the sand dunes and so forth, if it rains real hard, guess what happens?
Everything drowns.
Well, you get a big puddle of water, right, that stays for a while. And that puddle of water may last 2 or 3 weeks. So one day during lunchtime, I went out after it rained pretty hard, and I walked out through the desert to see what was happening, right, because when it rains in the desert, all kinds of strange things happen. And there was a puddle of water. It's almost as big as this room, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of course, there was nothing in it. Right? A couple days later, I went out and looked, and guess what?
It's still there.
It's still there. Now it's got tadpoles. Little tadpoles swimming around. Where did they come from? I mean, we're out in the middle of the desert, right? Right? Well, back a couple days later, and I had these little frog-like things hopping around. 2 weeks later, Puddle was gone. And so were these little froggy-looking things. Where did they go?
He died.
They died? You think it died?
Adapted.
Oh no.
What I was looking at is something called Couch's Spadefoot Toad, right? Which looks like this. It's a couple inches long. That's probably about the right size for him, that picture. Right? He's a couple, 3 inches long. Right? And he's adapted to living in the desert. We have spade-footed toads up here, right? But they don't live like this guy. Right? Right? Because this one, he's over the millions of years, he's adapted himself to being able to live in the desert, right? And live in those ponds. So he's got to in this 2-week span of time, he's got to regenerate his population. They got to lay eggs, they got to fertilize, they got to hatch, all right? And then he has to go back and sort of become dormant, right? Until
The next
next rain, which could be a year or 2 away. Right? So we can't. He's called Spadefoot. You know what a spade is?
A shovel.
A shovel, right? That's good because most people say it's card, right? But it's a shovel, right? So let's take a look at a little drawing of him. Right there he is. He's blown up a little bit. Black and white drawing. We couldn't see it in that color picture, but right here. He has a little hard thing, like a fingernail, right on his leg, right there, right behind his foot, and that's his little spade. So what happens to this toad, right? Is out there when it rains, right? Comes out, he lays eggs. When the puddle dries up, what he does is he takes and goes with that spade and buries himself down in the ground. Right? Because he don't want to be out in the hot sun in the middle of the desert where it's 120 degrees, because what he's going to do is he's going to dry out and die. Right? So what he does is he takes and he buries himself down in the sand. And if you look in the desert, right, you get down there just a few inches underneath the surface, the sand is usually always wet. Right? It's like damp. So he gets down and he goes, digs himself down, and he's down there where it's nice and moist. Right? But he only has one problem. It may not rain for another year. Okay? So what he has to do is, when it rains, right? He's been down underneath the ground now. So when it rains, he digs himself up. Right? Now, how do you think he knows it when it's raining?
The water.
No.
Feels it.
He hears the raindrops hitting. That's not the moisture, but the raindrops hitting the surface or the thunder, right? And says, "Whoops, it's raining up there. It's time to go." Digs himself up, right? The female lays something like 3,000 eggs, right? And they get fertilized. They hatch out at about a day into tadpoles. In less than 2 weeks, sometimes as little as like 9, 10 days, those tadpoles metamorphose into frogs, right? He can eat enough bugs in one meal to last him a whole year. So he runs around and he grabs up all the bugs he can get, right? And as the puddle starts to dry up again, right? Then he takes it and he goes, and he sits down there like this, underneath the ground. His tummy's full. He doesn't have any snacks. He doesn't have any TV. Doesn't have any stereo. There's no computer, no video games. And he waits until what?
So it rains.
Until he hears the raindrops dropping on top and
the thunder,
and then he comes back up and he starts the whole cycle all over again. So he's adapted himself now. Natural selection, right? Over the millions of years that he can survive. Right? He comes up and he does his thing for that couple weeks when there's water in the puddle. Right? When it dries up, he goes back underground and he waits. If we took one of the spade-footed toads from here, took him down and put him in the middle of the desert, what's going to happen to him?
they're not going to last very long.
He's not going to last very long because he doesn't. He's first of all, physically, he's not able to do all those things in a short period of time. Right? He's probably geared to our seasonal kinds of things, so he's not going to survive down in the middle of the desert. Okay, so that's natural selection. Okay, over the period of maybe 1 million years or so. He's adapted himself. Now, where I actually worked was a place called White Sands Missile Test Range, which the main portion of it is down here. Up in the edge of this missile test range, this is where they test all the guided missiles. Right. It's a thing called, what's this called? White Sands National Monument. Right? That's why this is called the White Sands Missile Test Range, right? It's because of that national monument there. White Sands National Monument, it's a wonderful beach. Looks like that. All the desert around it looks like that. Okay? But there's one little spot in there where the sand is white. And the reason the sand is white, right, is because it's not really silicon sand like what we're familiar with here around on the beaches, right? It's off to the west of here, there's some mountains, right? And those mountains, at one time, were under the ocean. All right, and you study the tectonic plates and the lifting, all right? So all that part of the United States and Mexico out there was under the ocean, right? So under the, of course, we had all kinds of seashells and all those sorts of things, dying little varmints with shells, right? And those seashells are what? Basically, they're calcium, just like our bones, right? And our teeth. So, so we had layers and bone layers and layers of dying sea animals, seashells being deposited. In fact, there are some places you can walk around out in the desert, you can still pick up some of the seashells, right, that have been there for millions of years. So when it rose up, and it created these mountains. Now, the wind coming across the mountains picked up a little bit of this calcium, right, called gypsum, and deposited it in an area called White Sands White Sands National Monument, right, which is what this is, right? And people go out there and they visit, right? It's a national monument. You're not supposed to carry the sand away because they don't want everybody out there carrying the sand, but there's all kinds of folks, and they've got roads where you can drive in, right? And people go out and picnic, you do a little sledding, slide down the sand dunes because some of these sand dunes are like 50, 60 feet high. Right? So, all white. Now, if you go out in the Chihuahuan Desert and you find a lizard, he's going to look something like that. Why do you think he looks like that?
Because it's not really moist, so his scales are all
Not
dry.
real moist, and if we put him in this kind of a desert,
He can blend in.
he'll blend in, right? So this big old hawk that's flying along, looking for something to eat, all right, he blends in, and
Nobody can
he
detect
probably
him.
escapes and doesn't get eaten. But if we take him and we put him out here in this white sand, like this, the hawk comes flying along, and he sees this guy.
He's an easy target.
He's an easy target, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what's going to happen to him? He's not going to last very long. All right, so natural selection is going to get rid of him. Now, you have brothers and sisters?
Yeah,
Yeah.
sister.
Is she exactly the same complexion you are?
No.
No? She's a little darker, a little lighter?
Yeah.
Okay, same thing happens to these guys. All right? If we got a whole bunch of little lizards, there's going to be some of them that are lighter, right? And we put them out here in the white sand, and what's going to happen? Their chances of surviving are going to be much higher. So eventually, over generation after generation after generation, what do you think is going to happen to the color of the lizards out in that white sand?
Turn white.
Change.
They're going to turn white. Right. In fact, that's exactly what happens if we get rid of all these brown people that are here, and we get a lizard that looks like that. Right? He's pretty light. In fact, if we were to compare him, put him out in the white sand alongside one of those other lizards from down in the regular Chihuahuan Desert, and what happens to him? He's still there. You can see him, right? I don't know whether they can see him on the camera or not, but he's there. There's a white one. There's a brown one. Now that big old hawk comes flying along, looks down. Which one's he going to get?
The brown one.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to get the brown one, right? The brown one's going to become dinner. So, and that's exactly what happened in that area, right? These little animals that can't move very, very far, very fast, right? Eventually get selected, and they all become white. And you go into the national White Sands National Monument there, you find that those lizards are all white. Some of the mice, they have these little kangaroo rats, mice, out in the middle of the desert, right? Normally, out in the Chihuahuan Desert, they're brown, but in White Sands National Monument, they're a little bit lighter. Right? Natural selection. Okay, just a little piece of history. So that's what national selection all boils down to being. Back to the Smithsonian Test Range. Okay. Here's where the National Monument is. Up here, there's something called Trinity Site. This doesn't have anything to do with natural selection, all right, but it's interesting because it's on my map. You know what happened at Trinity Site?
A missile went there. A missile.
No.
Flooded.
Something just as important, though.
Meteor.
No.
Flooded.
What?
It flooded.
No. Didn't flood. All right, I won't torture you anymore. What happened there? July 16th, 1945.
The
The
alien sighting?
The what?
Alien sighting?
No. Well, they claim they sight aliens out there all the time. No, they set off the first atomic bomb there. Right up there. Now, what they did is they had it mounted on a tower, right? They didn't drop it out of an airplane or anything. It was on the tower. because this is the first one and they're experimenting, and they way out, and this is way out in the desert. I mean, it's out there quite a ways. There's nothing around it, right, except those white lizards down there, national monument. And they set it off, right? So one of the way you make glass is, what do? You melt sand,
Yeah.
right? So when that blast went off, right, and enough heat, it melted the sand all around it. So you got these little gobbles of glass all around where the site where they set it off. It's still a little bit radioactive, not much, but a little bit. It's usually closed off to the public. People can't get in there, except twice a year. They take bus tours, right? You get a bus and they take people out, and they go out and visit that first site, I like home site. All right, I just thought I'd throw that in because it is there. Natural selection is what?
Animals that are that learn to adapt to things.
Right.
To, like its ecosystem.
They learn to adapt, or they're physically able to adapt to the ecosystem. They're the ones that are going to survive. The ones that don't adapt are not going to survive. So we have that natural selection. Ecosystem is what?
And a place where living or non-living things are.
The place where living and it's a system, right? And what we mean by a system is something that works together, right? All these living and non-living things work together to form this system. If they didn't work together, it wouldn't be a system. So we go out here in our ecosystem. We have here in New England, all the plants and animals, plus the soil and the non-living things, all work together to form our own ecosystem, right? So that's it for today. What's the Chihuahuan Desert named after?
The state of
The state in Mexico, all right? Not the little dog, not your little friendly dog. Thank you very much. We'll see you next time. So.